When the storm of life strips away everything you built, what keeps you standing? This is the story of Quang and Linda, two souls scarred by loss, yet bound by resilience. Quang returns after losing all his possessions to bandits, only to find Linda struggling with the devastation of floods that destroyed her farm. As a new typhoon approaches, he vows to stay by her side, fighting to protect what little remains. Will love and determination be enough to withstand nature's fury? Subscribe now and join us on this emotional journey of survival, hope, and unbreakable bonds. The late afternoon sun was sinking low, casting long golden streaks of light across the quiet farmyard when Quang sat down beside Linda on the worn wooden bench in front of her farmhouse. The breeze carried with it the faint scent of damp soil, still heavy with memories of past floods. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Quang's shoulders slumped forward, his hands clenched tightly together as if he was trying to hold on to something invisible, something already slipping through his grasp. His eyes, once filled with determination, now held only a shadow of exhaustion. Finally, in a voice that cracked under the weight of his pain, he whispered, "I never thought it could happen so quickly. Everything I worked for, everything I built, gone in the blink of an eye. Those men took everything, Linda. I have nothing left." Linda turned to look at him, her expression soft, her heart aching for the man beside her. She reached out and laid her hand gently on his shoulder, as though she could somehow ease the burden pressing down on him. She knew the devastation of sudden loss all too well. "Quang, I understand more than you think." Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. She began to tell him about the days when he had gone missing, those endless weeks of fear and uncertainty when no one knew if he was safe, if he was even alive. In his absence, she had faced her own calamity. The farm that she had poured her soul into, the fields she had nurtured with years of sweat and hope, had been drowned under the merciless floodwaters. Her eyes drifted toward the pasture, where once green fields had stretched wide and proud. The rains came without mercy, she recalled, her tone quiet yet filled with anguish. The river rose higher and higher until it swallowed everything. I tried to save them, but the animals, one by one, they were swept away or trapped in their pens with no escape. She paused, her hand tightening on his shoulder as though she could somehow ease the burden pressing down on him. The crops didn't stand a chance either. The water rose overnight, and by morning the farm was nothing but mud and silence. The damage was so great, I didn't know how I would go on. Quang listened in silence, his heart sinking further with every word. The picture Linda painted was almost too vivid, and he could imagine her standing helpless in the storm, fighting desperately against a force of nature far greater than her strength. He lowered his gaze, guilt welling up inside him. He had been gone, forced into darkness by the cruelty of strangers, while she had battled alone. He should have been there. The thought gnawed at him like an unhealed wound. The quiet between them was heavy, filled with grief and the echo of things lost. Yet, in that shared silence, something else flickered, a fragile thread of understanding that bound their sorrows together. Quang finally lifted his eyes to meet hers. His voice rough, he murmured, "I'm so sorry, Linda. I should have been here. You went through all that while I was..." He stopped himself, unable to finish. Linda shook her head gently, her eyes glistening but strong. "No, Quang. None of this was your fault. We've both suffered, but we're here now. That's what matters." Her words carried a quiet strength, one that steadied him as his world felt shattered. In that moment, with the fading sun painting the horizon in hues of fire and dusk, Quang realized that though they had both endured storms of loss, they were no longer alone. And in Linda's presence, in her unspoken resilience, he felt the first stirrings of hope, fragile but alive. Quang reached for Linda's hand, his fingers trembling slightly as they intertwined with hers. The warmth of her palm grounded him, pulling him back from the whirlwind of guilt and despair that threatened to consume him. He held on tightly, as though she were the last anchor in a sea of uncertainty. "I don't ever want you to face something like that alone again," he said firmly, his voice steadier this time, carrying with it a quiet but unshakable determination. His words were not merely a promise, but a vow, one forged from the scars of their shared hardships. Linda gave a faint, almost weary smile, though her eyes betrayed the weight she carried inside. There was a flicker of gratitude in her expression, yet it was shadowed by an undeniable fear. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where distant clouds were beginning to gather, dark and heavy, like silent harbingers of what was to come. "You know, Quang," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, "the weather reports say the 5th storm of the season is on its way, stronger than the last. The rivers are already swollen. When it reaches us, it could be worse than anything we've faced before." Her words struck Quang like a hammer to the chest. He remembered vividly the way she had described the last flood, the howling winds, the thunder that shook the very earth, the water rising mercilessly until it claimed all she had worked for. He could almost see it, the terrified animals, the desperate attempts to save them, and the crushing silence that followed when all hope was lost. The thought of Linda standing once more in the path of such destruction filled him with a protective fury. Linda clasped his hand tighter, as though she too feared he might slip away again. Her voice quivered, though she fought to keep it steady. "I can still hear the cries of the cattle when the water came. They were helpless, Quang. I was helpless. And then when it was over, when the waters finally receded, the farm was nothing but mud, emptiness, and broken fences. I buried more than animals that day. I buried dreams." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and Quang's heart twisted painfully at the sight. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a tender kiss against her knuckles, a gesture both of comfort and of unspoken apology. "Linda," he said softly, but with steel in his tone, "you won't face it alone this time, I swear it. Whatever storm comes, I'll be here." The wind picked up, rustling the trees that bordered the farm, carrying with it the faint scent of rain yet to fall. The sky, once golden, was fading into hues of gray, as if the heavens themselves were listening to their conversation, preparing to unleash their wrath once more. Linda shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and leaned closer to Quang, as though his presence could shield her from both the chill of the evening and the storm looming in her heart. "Do you ever wonder how much more we can endure? How many times the storms can take everything before there's nothing left to fight for?" Her words were heavy, tinged with despair, but beneath them lay a plea for reassurance, for hope. Quang's gaze did not waver. He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands, forcing her to look into his eyes. "We endure as long as it takes," he replied, "because no matter what we lose, as long as we have each other, there's always something worth fighting for. The storms can destroy our land, our animals, even our homes, but they will never take away the will inside us. They will never take away what we mean to one another." For the first time in days, Linda allowed herself to exhale fully, a deep release of the fear that had coiled so tightly around her chest. She leaned into his touch, her forehead resting against his, her breath mingling with his in the quiet of the dusk. The storm clouds gathered above them, but in that moment, Linda realized that even as the darkness drew closer, Quang's presence was a light, fragile, flickering, but enough to guide her through. Quang drew in a steady breath, the weight of his decision crystallizing in his mind as if carved into stone. He could not allow Linda to shoulder this battle alone, not again. "This time will be different," he said, his voice calm but carrying the strength of conviction. "I'll ask the foreman for a few days off. Work can wait, but protecting you, protecting this farm, our farm, cannot." The word "our" slipped out naturally, but neither of them questioned it. It felt right, as though destiny itself had woven their struggles into a shared tapestry. Linda's lips parted slightly, surprise flashing across her face before dissolving into something softer, an emotion caught between relief and disbelief. For weeks, she had carried the thought that she would once again have to face the wrath of nature by herself, preparing sandbags in the dead of night, tying makeshift barriers around the barn, and praying endlessly for mercy from a sky that never seemed to listen. But now, sitting there with Quang's hands wrapped firmly around hers, she felt for the first time that she would not have to stand in the storm's shadow alone. Still, the memory of last year's devastation pressed heavily on her heart. "Quang," she whispered, her voice shaking as though dredged up from the depths of her pain. "You don't understand. The flood came so fast. The water didn't just take the animals, it ripped away everything. The fences, the grain, the seedlings I had planted with such care. When the sun rose the next morning, it was like death had laid its hand over everything I loved." She paused, her throat tightening as her eyes filled with tears. "I can't go through that again. I won't survive it." Quang reached out and brushed away the tear that slipped down her cheek, his touch both tender and resolute. "Listen to me," he said, locking his gaze with hers. "We're going to be ready this time. We'll reinforce the barn walls, dig trenches to divert the water, and store the feed where the flood can't reach it. We'll do everything together, side by side. The storm may be strong, but it won't break us." The intensity in his words stirred something deep inside Linda. A spark of courage she thought had been extinguished flickered to life once more. She drew a shaky breath, the image of muddy fields and drowned cattle still vivid in her mind, but overshadowed now by the vision of Quang working beside her, building, securing, preparing, not leaving, not abandoning her to the merciless roar of the river. The farm around them seemed to listen too, as though the soil, the fences, even the weathered walls of the farmhouse leaned closer to absorb his vow. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of rain that had not yet fallen, and the first stars began to pierce the deepening twilight above. Linda closed her eyes, allowing herself to lean against Quang, her head resting on his shoulder. For the first time in months, her body released the tension it had held like armor. "You don't know how much that means to me," she murmured, her voice muffled against him. "Every time I hear the river swell, my chest tightens and I feel like I'm about to lose everything again. But with you here, maybe I can believe we'll make it through." Quang tightened his arm around her, holding her close as though he could shield her from every raindrop, every gust of wind, every cruel twist of fate. "We will," he promised quietly, but with the force of an oath that would never be broken. "No matter how fierce the storm, we'll face it together. That's what makes us stronger than any flood." As darkness wrapped itself around the farm and the night deepened, the looming storm was no less real, no less threatening. Yet within the small circle of warmth and resolve they created between them, Linda felt a fragile but undeniable certainty take root. Even if the river rose again, even if the winds tore at the earth, she and Quang would stand, together, unyielding and unafraid.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các khán giả của kênh Lý Tử Ninja Review. Vậy là tập phim ngày hôm nay của chúng ta đã kết thúc tại đây. Trong tập phim ngày hôm nay thì Việt Nam đang phải chống chọi với cơn bão số 5 sắp vào đến đất liền, và trang trại của Quang và Ninja đã gặp phải mưa lớn khiến cho ờ, lũ lụt gây thiệt hại rất lớn ở tại trang trại của Ninja, khiến cho gia súc bị chết, và cây cối của cho hoa màu trong vườn của Ninja cũng bị ngập lụt chết theo. Liệu rằng Quang và Ninja có thể chống chọi giúp trang trại vượt qua giai đoạn khó khăn này hay không? Tất cả sẽ được hé lộ vào các tập tiếp theo. Nếu các bạn thấy tập hôm nay hay, hấp dẫn thì hãy cho mình xin một nút like, một nút chia sẻ nhé. Và đừng quên hãy để lại bình luận ở dưới video. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn vào tập ngày mai. Bye bye!